There are many tales of Dracula. Some are whispered in the dark with trembling voices. Others are written in bold ink, as if the very act of naming him might hold back the shadow. Most are drenched in blood, the glint of fangs, the swirl of a black cloak, the rustle of bat wings in a moonless sky. But before he was a nightmare, he was a boy, a prince, a second son in a land where second sons were often forgotten or sacrificed. His heart beat with the same fragile rhythm as yours and mine, but somewhere within it lay a seed of darkness, planted long before he understood its shape. It was the year 1442. In the far reaches of Eastern Europe lay Wallachia, a land of jagged mountains and black forests, caught between two hungry empires. To the north, the Kingdom of Hungary, its knights still clinging to the fading dream of crusade. To the south, the rising Ottoman Empire, with its armies of silk and steel. The mountains here were not gentle. They rose like the broken teeth of some ancient beast, their peaks veiled in cloud, their slopes cut with deep gorges where the sun lingered only a few hours each day. Wolves hunted. The valleys, their howls carrying across the snow at night. The people of these hills knew hardship as they knew their own names. The bite of frost in the morning air, the weight of a sword worn not for show but for survival. In the capital, Targovik, the court of Voivode Vlad II Dracula glittered in the torchlight, but beneath the banners and feasts lay a web of fear. Dracula was not merely a ruler. He was a member of the Order of the Dragon, sworn to defend Christendom against the Ottomans. His name, Dracula, meant the dragon, but in the local tongue it also meant the devil. It was into this world that his second son, Vlad, was born. From the moment he could walk, the boy was surrounded by steel and whispers. The clink of mail armor was as familiar to him as the lullabies his nurse might have sung. Yet, for all his princely status, he was not sheltered from the harsher lessons of his father's court. He learned early that smiles could hide daggers, that an oath sworn in the hall might dissolve before the candles burned low. His mother, Princess Sienenia of Moldavia, was said to be a quiet woman, pious and watchful. Some claimed her blood carried old magic from the northern forests. Others said she feared it. She taught Vlad to read by candlelight, tracing the letters with his small finger across rough parchment, the shadows on the wall dancing like restless spirits. But Wallachia was never still for long. By the time Vlad was 6, his father's alliances were already fraying. The Ottomans demanded tribute. The Hungarians demanded loyalty. Dracula, ever the tactician, tried to balance both, but the tightrope was too thin. One winter night, messengers arrived at the fortress bearing the Sultan's seal. The air in the great hall turned cold despite the roaring fire. Vlad watched from the shadows as his father read the letter, his jaw tightening with every line. When the messengers left, their eyes lingered on the boy, not with kindness, but with the cold calculation of men weighing coin. Within weeks, the decision was made. To preserve his rule, Dracula would send his two younger sons, Vlad and his brother Radu, to the Ottoman court as hostages. It was a gesture of trust, but also a leash. The boys' lives would ensure their father's obedience. The journey south was a blur of frozen rivers and muddy roads. At night, they slept in small, smoky inns where the scent of wet wool clung to their blankets. Sometimes Vlad woke to find Radu staring into the dark, lips moving as if in prayer. Though no sound came out, crossing into Ottoman lands was like stepping into another world. The air was warmer, heavy with the smell of spices and burning oil. Minarets rose above the cities like pale spears, their shadows stretching long at sunset. Vlad was given fine clothes, instructed in Turkish, and taught the courtly manners of the Sultan's palace. Yet the silks could not disguise the bars of his invisible cage. He quickly learned that a hostage was neither guest nor prisoner. He was both. At any moment, a father's misstep in distant Wallachia could mean the tightening of that leash or the swing of a sword. In the palace gardens, Vlad sometimes sat by the reflecting pools, watching the carp ripple the water. Around him, courtiers spoke in low voices, their glances sharp as blades. He understood little at first, but over time he caught words: rebellion, tribute, betrayal, Radu. Softer in manner, adapted more easily. He smiled when expected, learned the music and poetry of the Ottomans, even earned the favor of the Sultan himself. Vlad, however, kept his distance. He trained with the Janissaries, mastering the bow and the curved sword. But in the privacy of his chamber he sharpened other weapons: his memory, his patience, and a cold resolve that someday he would be free. There's a story, perhaps only a rumor, that one winter night, after the palace lamps were extinguished, Vlad wandered the corridors alone. The marble was cold under his bare feet, and the air smelled faintly of incense and damp stone. In the shadow of an archway, he stopped. A figure stood there, cloaked in black, its face hidden beneath a hood. No guards challenged it, no servant dared approach. The stranger spoke only once, in a voice like dry leaves scraping across the floor. In the dark, we learn who we truly are. When Vlad blinked, the figure was gone. He never spoke of it to Radu, perhaps fearing his brother would laugh, or perhaps fearing he would not. Years passed. The seasons turned in Wallachia, but for Vlad they were measured not by harvests or festivals, but by the arrival of news from home. Sometimes it was good, his father holding the throne, the people safe. Other times it was not. Rebellions, skirmishes, rumors of betrayal. In the Ottoman court, he grew into a young man with the bearing of a hawk, sharp-eyed, silent until needed, and utterly still when he watched. The other hostages avoided him. Some whispered that when he prayed, he did not speak to God but to something older, something that had been waiting for him since before he was born. Looking back, one could say the boy Vlad died in those years, and something else took his place. He had learned the language of power, not the words spoken in council, but the silences between them. He had learned the uses of fear and the uses of charm, and he had learned, above all, that a promise meant nothing without the strength to enforce it. One day, he would leave the Sultan's court. One day, he would ride north again, through the passes of the Carpathians, back to the land that had given him life and taken his childhood. And when he did, the seed of darkness planted long ago would take root, fed by blood and memory, until the man called Vlad would be known by another name entirely. A name the world would never forget. You can tell much about a man by the way he returns home. Some come in silence, as if afraid the land will not remember them. Others arrive in triumph, banners snapping, eager to be recognized. Vlad returned to Wallachia like a shadow slipping through a half-open door, quiet, deliberate, and utterly determined. The boy who had left under guard returned as a man forged in exile. His face was leaner, his eyes darker, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had learned patience and vengeance. Wallachia, when he came back, was a land in pieces. The mountains still stood where they always had. The forest still whispered under moonlight. But the court was fractured. Nobles shifted loyalties like sand blown in the wind. A coin from the Ottomans today could outweigh a promise to the Hungarians tomorrow. Vlad's father was dead, murdered after being betrayed by boyars he had once trusted. His elder brother had met a worse fate, blinded, tortured, and buried alive. These were not accidents. They were messages, carved into the memory of the land, meant to remind every ruler that the throne was a seat of knives. Vlad understood this. He did not weep publicly. He did not curse the heavens. Instead, he began to plan. In the great hall of Targovik, he sat upon the voivode's throne for the first time. The seat was high-backed, carved from oak blackened by age, the dragon crest of his father staring down from above. Around him, the boyars murmured, testing the new ruler with their eyes. Vlad said little. He simply watched. and he remembered the faces of those who had smiled at his father while sharpening their knives. It began slowly. A tax here, a levy there, a summons to court for a noble whose loyalty seemed uncertain. Sometimes the summons ended in a polite dismissal. Sometimes it did not. Fear became Vlad's first tool, not the reckless fear of a tyrant lashing out at every shadow, but a careful, cultivated dread, the kind that makes a man wake in the night at the creak of his own floorboards, unsure if the sound came from within or from someone waiting outside. The chronicles call him Vlad Pepe, Vlad the Impaler. The name was not born in a single night, but from 1,000 acts. A merchant caught cheating his customers found hanging from a stake at the edge of the market. A boyar accused of plotting treason discovered, at sunrise, that the path from his gate to the river was lined with sharpened poles, and one of them was for him. These stories spread faster than fire. Whether they were true in every detail no longer mattered. Fear filled the spaces where truth faltered. And yet, there was order. The roads became safer. Banditry dwindled. Trade flowed more freely. The same people who whispered of his cruelty also admitted, in quieter tones, that the land had not known such peace in years. Still, peace in Wallachia was a fragile thing. The Ottomans, sensing the change in leadership, pressed for tribute. Hungary, wary of a strong neighbor, whispered of alliances that could turn to war. Vlad stood between them like a sword balanced on its edge. The defining moment came in the winter of 1462. The Ottomans had decided Wallachia would bow or it would burn. Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, gathered an army said to number over 100,000 men. They would march north, crush the resistance, and replace Vlad with a ruler more pliable. Vlad's own forces numbered a fraction of that. A lesser man might have sued for peace, offered gold, or simply fled. Vlad chose another path. The chronicles say he called his captains to the fortress. At Pornari, the wind off the mountains howled through the halls as they gathered. Vlad stood at the head of the table, the firelight painting shadows on the stone walls behind him. He told them there would be no retreat. Instead, he would give the Sultan a message that would be remembered for centuries. The plan was brutal in its simplicity. As the Ottoman army advanced toward the capital, Vlad ordered a scorched earth policy. Villages were emptied, wealth poisoned, supplies burned. Those who could fight were called to the fortresses. Those who could not were moved beyond the reach of the invaders. And then came the centerpiece, the forest of the impaled. Thousands of Ottoman prisoners, captured in earlier skirmishes, were executed by impalement. The stakes were driven deep into the frozen ground, their grisly banners swaying in the winter wind. The line stretched for miles along the road to Targovik. When the Sultan's army arrived, they found not a city eager to surrender, but a spectacle of horror. The air was thick with the stench of decay. Ravens circled above, their cries sharp in the cold. Even the hardened veterans of the Ottoman ranks faltered at the sight. Sultan Mehmed, it is said, stared for a long time in silence. Then he ordered the army to turn back. This was not the end of the war, but it was the moment when Vlad's legend crossed the threshold. No longer was he merely a cunning prince or a ruthless commander. He had become something darker in the minds of his enemies, a figure to be feared even in stories told by the fire. And yet, for all his ferocity, there was method in his cruelty. Vlad understood that in a land as small as Wallachia, survival did not come from matching the strength of larger empires. It came from making the cost of conquest too high to bear. Still, each victory carried a shadow. The same boyars who had betrayed his father now plotted against him. The Ottomans bided their time. Even in Hungary, there were those who saw in Vlad not a bulwark against the Turk, but a man whose ambition might one day threaten them. It is in these years that the line between man and myth began to blur. Some claim to have seen him ride alone through the forests at night, his horse's hoofs making no sound. Others swore he could stare into a man's eyes and know every secret he had ever kept. Whether these were lies, exaggerations, or something more, only Vlad knew, and he never corrected them. For a man who understands the uses of fear, even superstition is a weapon. By the end of that winter, Vlad Pepe had secured his place on the throne and in the minds of his enemies. But he had also set in motion the events that would one day consume him. In the cold silence of Pornari, perhaps he already knew, perhaps he understood that every ruler in Wallachia sat not upon a throne, but upon the edge of a blade. And perhaps he was already making peace with the darkness that had grown within him since boyhood. There are moments in history when a man's deeds outlive his body. Sometimes they shine, as with saints or poets. Sometimes they linger like a stain that will not wash away. Vlad Pepe will leave both, a legacy written in steel and fire, and a shadow that would stretch far beyond his grave. The years after the Forest of the Impaled were as restless as the years before. Vlad's victory over the Sultan's great host had not ended the threat. It had only bought time. The Ottomans waited, licking their wounds, gathering their strength. In the courts of Hungary, whispers turned to schemes, each lord wondering whether this fierce prince might one day turn his sharp gaze westward. Vlad was a ruler surrounded by enemies and haunted by the memory of betrayal. The boyars had not forgotten how many of their number had been purged in his early reign. Some plotted revenge openly, others hid behind smiles, waiting for the moment his guard might falter. Vlad met treachery with the same cold precision as he always had, but the more he struck, the more his list of enemies grew. He slept little. Those close to him claimed he would often rise in the darkest hour before dawn and walk the ramparts of Pornari Castle, staring out into the mist that curled through the valley below. The guards learned not to speak to him during these walks. His eyes seemed fixed on something far away, or something only he could see. There are stories from this time that even the most careful chroniclers wrote down with hesitation. Tales of envoys who entered the voivode's chamber by night and never came out again. Of foreign spies found days later, pale as marble, with no mark upon them save 2 small wounds at the neck. The rational mind calls these fabrications, the inventions of fearful peasants or rival courts eager to paint Vlad as more beast than man. Yet in the villages beneath the Carpathians, they spoke of the Strigoi, the restless dead, walking by night, feeding on the living. And in their stories, the line between Vlad Pepe and these creatures of shadow began to fade. By the mid-1460s, the Ottomans moved again. This time, they came not with a vast host, but with a strategy aimed at the man himself. Through intrigue and pressure, they secured the release of Radu, Vlad's younger brother, from his long service at the Sultan's court. Radu returned not as an exile, but as a favored ally of the Ottomans. He brought with him promises of peace, of stability, an army ready to install him as ruler in Vlad's place. The brothers met only once during this campaign, across the no-man's land between their forces. No one knows what words passed between them. Some say Vlad offered him a place at his side. Others say Radu offered his brother safe exile if he would surrender. What is certain is that when they parted, they were no longer brothers, but enemies. In the months that followed, Vlad was driven from his seat of power. Pornari fell not to storming ladders, but to betrayal within its own walls. He escaped into the mountains with a handful of loyal men, the snow covering their tracks. For years, his life became a shadow play, a prince without a throne, moving between allies who feared him almost as much as they hated his enemies. At one point, he was even imprisoned by the Hungarian king, held in a fortress far from his homeland. It is said that during this captivity, his cell was bare save for a few simple furnishings, and a row of wooden stakes he carved by hand, each one set neatly along the wall like a grim reminder of who he was. But darkness has a way of returning to its source. In the late 1470s, Vlad was restored to power for a third and final reign. It was brief, less than a year, but in that time, he once again turned his attention to the Ottomans, striking at their forces with the same ruthless precision as before. And then, as suddenly as he had reappeared, he was gone. The manner of his death is uncertain. Some chronicles claim he fell in battle, his body hacked apart by Ottoman soldiers who feared even his corpse. Others suggest treachery, that he was killed by one of his own men, bribed or deceived. There's even a tale that he vanished altogether, seen riding into a foggy pass and never emerging, his armor gleaming briefly before the mist swallowed him whole. What is known is that his head was sent to Constantinople, where the Sultan had it displayed on a stake for all to see. As for his body, no one is sure. The monks of Snagov Monastery claim he was buried in their church, beneath a simple stone with no inscription. Centuries later, when archaeologists opened the supposed tomb, they found it empty. No bones, no trace, only the cold echo of a space that had been disturbed long ago. It was then the whispers began again, that Vlad had never truly died, that he had walked out of the grave and into the forests, to ride beneath the moon until the end of days, for the world beyond Wallachia. His story might have ended there, a brutal, brilliant, and bloodstained chapter in the history of the Balkans. But in the late 19th century, an Irish writer named Bram Stoker stumbled upon his name. Stoker wove the scraps of history into a new kind of terror, the Count Dracula of his novel, an immortal predator who could cross oceans, climb walls like a lizard, and command the creatures of the night. The real Vlad was no such supernatural being. Yet in a way, Stoker's creation made the man immortal. Through ink and imagination, the Prince of Wallachia was reborn as a Lord of Darkness, forever stuck in the borders between fact and fiction. Today, if you walk the ruins of Ponari, the wind will whistle through the empty halls. The stones are cold beneath your hand, the moss damp and slick. In the valley below, the Arjak River twists like a dark ribbon through the pines. At dusk, when the mist rises from the water and the sky deepens to purple, you may feel a prickle at the back of your neck, the ancient instinct that tells you are being watched. Turn quickly, and you will see nothing. But linger, and perhaps you will hear it, the faint echo of hooves on stone, the rustle of a cloak in the wind, and a voice, low and amused, speaking your name. Thus the man became the myth, and the myth became something more, a shadow without end, a story that will not die. And somewhere in the dark, perhaps he waits still,